Hello and welcome to this PV Magazine webinar, Unlocking the Potential of Renewables with Green Hydrogen. My name is Blake Matic. I'm an editor at PV Magazine and I will be your moderator today. Now, the more than competitive cost of renewables, particularly solar, and the imperative need for emissions reductions in difficult to decarbonise sectors are just two of the drivers working to ensure that after several false starts over the decades, the rush for hydrogen has arrived. Of course, if hydrogen is to reduce emissions, it needs to be green. And just as green hydrogen itself is the product of a technology partnership, so too will the realisation between First Solar, Nel Hydrogen, and Terabase Energy, a partnership which sees leading manufacturers of solar modules and electrolyzers combined with cutting-edge solar plant controls and a SCADA solution. In other words, three of the key ingredients for minimizing the levelized cost of hydrogen. Now, I know the great interest in this webinar has nothing to do with myself, so let me introduce our presenters. We have Stephen Szymanski, VP Sales and Marketing for the Americas at Nel Hydrogen, Dr. Prakit Sinha, Senior Scientist Sustainability Research at First Solar, and Mahesh Majaria, EVP Operational Technology at Terabase Energy. Thank you for turning your cameras on, gentlemen. Before we start, there is just a few minor housekeeping matters to mention. Firstly, if at any point you can't hear us, myself, or our presenters, please let us know in the Q&A and chat function. Secondly, we are recording this webinar and an email link of the recording will be sent to all registrants after the event, of course. Finally, I'd like to encourage you to join in, to write questions in the Q&A function as they arise in your mind, because at the end, we will be hosting a Q&A section. And I'm sure, considering the interest, there will be an enormous amount of questions. So get them in as early as you can. Let me know thoughts, queries, ideas, and we'll see what we can do at the end of the session. I'm sure our presenters will be eager to share their knowledge and expertise. But that's enough from me. Let's hear from our first presenter, Stephen Szymanski, as I mentioned, VP of Sales and Marketing for the Americas at Nel Hydrogen. The virtual floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Blake. Appreciate the introduction. And why don't we jump to the agenda quickly? This just kind of provides an overview of the content that we'll be discussing today. And I'll be starting off with a quick introduction of myself and Nel Hydrogen. Next slide, please. So as Blake mentioned, I'm Steve Szymanski. I'm the VP of Sales and Marketing for the Americas for Nel Hydrogen's electrolyzer division. And, Nel is a Norwegian company. We have two primary divisions, the electrolyzer division, which I'll be focusing on today, as well as our fueling division in Denmark. I have been at the Nel US subsidiary here in Connecticut for about 21 years and, have a long kind of background in sales and business development. And I'm responsible for electrolyzer sales, both the PEM electrolyzer technology that we manufacture here in the US, as well as the alkaline electrolyzer technology that we manufacture in Norway, in North and South America. And, I'm active in a number of organizations in the hydrogen space, primarily here in North America. Next slide, please. So just in terms of the kind of the primary theme that we want to discuss today, it's really all about competitive green hydrogen. And really there's kind of, three pillars to that. First of all, utility scale PV is, now offering, very competitive levelized cost of energy prices, but it's an intermittent source. And so, we want to leverage the cost, but, we need to try to deal with this intermittency as a solution. And, PEM electrolyzers, which our company manufactures, really provide the flexibility to kind of deal with that intermittency. And so, the combination of the two in kind of a hybrid system with an appropriate and optimized controller to optimize the performance and minimize the levelized cost of energy from a hybrid system is really the thing that is the novel solution that is of interest here, and that's what we're going to be discussing in the webinar today. Next slide, please. So just a couple quick slides on Nel Hydrogen. We really are kind of a market and technology leader in the electrolyzer space, and we've been doing commercial electrolyzers for almost 100 years through our company in Norway. And really, when we look at kind of the installation base and kind of the commercial heritage of Nel, really we really are kind of a commercial leader in this space. And very broadly, the markets that we serve through water electrolyzers is there's some broad categories that I've outlined here. Industrial. We've been selling into industrial markets for hydrogen for many years now. And really, those are, when I say industrial markets, I like to say that, it's really where, the hydrogen is being used for its molecular properties and not necessarily providing any kinds of energy use cases. But, those are, mature markets, and we've been selling successfully into those for quite some time. Green hydrogen, I think that, that's kind of the focus of today's webinar. Basically, using, kind of renewable energy to provide our carbon-free source of hydrogen for a variety of use cases. And then, hydrogen fueling is kind of a, kind of a specialized, subsector of that, in as much as, hydrogen for mobility is kind of a specialized use case of green hydrogen. Next slide, please. So just again to kind of reinforce the fact that we're really a dedicated hydrogen company. We like to describe ourselves as the largest pure play hydrogen company in the world, because the hydrogen is really our primary and exclusive commercial interest. And again, we kind of cover a value chain that goes from hydrogen production through processing to various end use cases, including the mobility sector. And so really, we believe that our technology really enables cross-sector decarbonization by coupling hydrogen production to renewable energy sources, so that we can really provide an end-to-end decarbonization solution. Next slide, please. And just again to kind of reinforce the fact that this is a commercial technology that's well proven. There's installations that we have around the world, and this just kind of shows a map of where we have electrolyzer installations and kind of the unit figures. And I'll say that our 2025 manufacturing capacity is already partially in place. I mean, we're suggesting by 2025 we'll have about 1.5 gigawatts per year of production capacity, and we're already more than a third of the way there in terms of the existing production capacity that we have. And certainly we have expansion plans that will add that additional capacity to get to this kind of future capacity. Next slide, please. Okay, so next, I think I'm going to turn over for First Solar's overview of their company.
Okay. Thanks, Steve. Next slide, please. Yes, my name is Parakit Sinha. I'm a senior scientist at First Solar. I've been working there for the last 11 years, managing their environmental stewardship and also many of their academic research collaborations, including working with the International Energy Agency. Next slide. So First Solar is a longstanding Tier 1 PV module manufacturer founded in 1999. It was founded with the mission of making solar affordable and mainstream, and set many of the industry benchmarks for cost, scale, and environmental stewardship. It's focused largely on larger scale solar projects, commercial and utility scale. Next slide. And First Solar is the largest PV manufacturer in the Western Hemisphere. Its success has been based on a differentiated thin film PV manufacturing process. It's the leanest production process in the industry, producing finished modules in a few hours in a single assembly line. And as a result, also has the lowest environmental footprint in the industry. Next slide. First Solar currently has manufacturing facilities in the US, in Ohio, as well as in Malaysia and Vietnam. And 2 additional factories are under construction, one in the US and one in India. And by 2024, the overall manufacturing capacity will be over 16 gigawatts. Next slide. First Solar's latest products are the Series 6 family, which were designed with the end user in mind in terms of the size of the product, as well as the ease of installation, reduced wire management, et cetera. Next slide. And most importantly, our customers pay for initial power, but they get paid for lifetime energy production. And so the Series 6 family has superior lifetime energy production, including the lowest warranty degradation rate, and superior performance in hot and humid climates, as well as immunity to cell cracking and LID and LETID. Next slide. I'll hand it over to Mahesh to talk about Terabase.
Hello, everyone. This is Mahesh Morjaria, and I'll give you. I'm EVP for Operational Technology at Terabase, and previously I was with First Solar 10 years, leading the development of utility-scale solar and storage plants. And prior to that, I was with GE and included a stint in wind turbines as well. So I have considerable experience in renewable field. Now, Terabase provides a digital and automation platform for terawatt scale solar installations. It starts off with a development technology where you can actually develop a project, and the second aspect of that is once you have designed a preliminary design of a project, it can be taken into construction, and we're developing construction automation that can enable easier construction of large PV plants. And finally, we have operational technology where we can provide the plant controls and SCADA system, particularly for hybrid plants like the green hydrogen plants that we were discussing here. With that, I'll turn it over back to Steve. Steve.
All right, thanks, Mahesh. Yeah, I'm going to discuss kind of the green hydrogen opportunity just a little more broadly. First of all, in terms of existing hydrogen markets, there's several broad categories of large hydrogen users, and today that represents about 70 million metric tons per year of hydrogen. And these are we describe as kind of gray hydrogen markets, and examples of some large sectors include ammonia, refineries and methanol. And currently only about 1% of the hydrogen that addresses these markets is coming from water electrolysis. So however, there is a lot of interest in decarbonizing these sectors, these industrial sectors. And so there's certainly growth potential for electrolysis in the existing markets. And so we see a lot of activity right now in terms of large electrolysis plants being quoted to address these existing large users of hydrogen. Next slide, please. But really, when we look at the growth opportunity for green hydrogen, most of it is in kind of new applications for hydrogen that really don't really exist today, or exist in a very small scale. And a lot of these are really kind of energy usage vectors. And so you can see some of the kind of the different kind of green hydrogen categories that we're looking at. And really, we see that, the existing, kind of gray hydrogen feedstocks, I mean, there's certainly growth potential there, but a lot of the rapid growth that we see is going to be coming from these new sectors. And so and since decarbonization is really a significant objective in developing these sectors, this is why, green hydrogen or hydrogen from renewable electrolysis is really the thing that's going to help to address these growing market sectors. Next slide, please. And we see, just by way of example, there's kind of some strong, market pulls in a couple areas here. I mean, the first one that I'll highlight is within, the mobility sector, particularly heavy duty. I think when you look at the value proposition for hydrogen in the mobility market, really, heavy duty is where hydrogen shines. And, I like to, say that, if you see a mobility use case that's currently being addressed by diesel, that's where hydrogen is going to play well. And so, some of these, applications like long haul trucks and mining vehicles and, kind of port applications, drayage, trucks, those are the ones where, emissions reduction is driving a lot of interest in that sector, and hydrogen provides a use case that matches up well. And then the second one I've already kind of touched on a little bit is this kind of an accelerated focus on decarbonizing industrial applications such as refineries and ammonia production. And, again, I mean, just to give you a representative number, when you look at kind of some of the commitments that have been already made for developing electrolysis plants around the world, even if only about 50% of the market share went to electrolyzers, each of these sectors could contribute, more than 2,000 gigawatts of potential. Next slide, please. And really, the thing that is really kind of driving the commercial viability of green hydrogen is really the cost of wind and solar dropping significantly, because ultimately, roughly 70 to 80% of the production cost of hydrogen from electrolysis is the cost of the electricity feedstock. So, as we have seen, some very low, prices for, wind and solar auctions, that really is the thing that is going to enable the commercial viability of green hydrogen. And really, we're always being compared to kind of existing production technologies of hydrogen, which today is largely coming from natural gas and coal. But we believe that at the kinds of renewable energy costs that we're seeing today, that we can effectively compete with gray hydrogen sources. Next slide, please. And really the thing that hydrogen technology is really kind of following a similar maturity curve to wind and solar. We're just a little bit further back, but it is increased volumes and getting to manufacturing technology that we've rolled out, for example, for our electrode factory in Norway, where you've got fully automated processes and you've got kind of real large scale commercial manufacturing. That's the thing that's going to help us to move up along this maturity curve. Next slide, please. And so really, just to kind of sum up where we think, green hydrogen costs can be in the relative near term, $1.50 per kilogram is a price level that is competitive with, gray hydrogen sources and blue hydrogen as well, which is kind of hydrogen from fossil fuels that includes carbon capture. And so we've kind of set this as a target that we believe is achievable by 2025. And really, it's going to enable green hydrogen to compete effectively in the marketplace by taking advantage of low-cost solar and wind. Next slide, please.
Okay, thanks, Steve. I'll be giving a little bit of background on how this collaboration started. And Steve already mentioned in one of his early slides that really this is a partnership of technology companies, leading technology companies, to make competitive green hydrogen a reality. So I'm going to give a few definitions. I think Steve already explained what competitive means. It's similar to the evolution of solar, which happened over the last 10, 15 years, where once solar reached grid parity, it really took off and could take hold in any market. And so Steve's describing what we'd like to happen with green hydrogen is to reach that gas parity benchmark, that $1.50 per kilogram, and that would require very low cost renewables. $20 a megawatt hour was the estimate for reaching that benchmark. And so I think the competitive side is clear. On the green side, I want to give a few definitions as well. So with green hydrogen, it's a pretty straightforward approach. You first have to electrify hydrogen production, and that's what you're doing with electrolysis. And then you have to use renewable electricity to power that electrolysis. So it seems pretty simple. But then, the trick is that you have to take this intermittent renewable source and pair it with the 24/7 electrolyzer operation. And so when you look into the details, it's actually a little more complicated. A year ago, I published some research in the journal Sustainable Energy Technology Assessments, where we looked at a hybrid solar wind electrolyzer plant in California, in which solar and wind were being combined to power the electrolyzer. We managed to get about 75% of the electricity demand of the electrolyzer met by renewables, but then the other 25% had to come from the grid. For the case of powering with renewables, on the bottom right, you'll see that the carbon footprint of green hydrogen is about an order of magnitude less than the traditional way of making hydrogen, which is with natural gas, with steam methane reforming. However, because of the need for 25% of the electricity to come from the grid, And on the top left, you'll see that the grid is quite more a bit more carbon intensive than the wind and solar. As a result, the final hybrid plant had a carbon footprint that was only half of the steam methane reforming. So the lesson here is that green hydrogen. The concept is simple, but the integration of the renewable electricity with the electrolyzer is really the key to making green hydrogen. The next slide. And so one other definition, I already talked about a hybrid plant, but what is a hybrid plant? By definition, a hybrid plant is one that combines two or more types of generation or combines generation with storage. And in this case, we can think of electrolyzer hydrogen production as a kind of chemical storage. And so we're combining generation with storage. And we also have different flows of energy here. We have electricity that can go to the grid or can come from the grid or can get consumed behind the meter. And so we're having to integrate all these different flows. Next slide. And what makes a hybrid plant possible in the first place is flexibility. So you need the components that you're combining to be flexible in order to integrate them. And fortunately, in the case of solar, you have a great deal of scalability. Whether you want a very small to very large system, you can just add more components. And similarly with PEM electrolysis, you can add more stacks and get the size you want. And as a result, you can pretty much determine whatever scale of hydrogen production you want. Next slide. And also importantly, the PEM electrolysis is robust to intermittency in the electricity production. So it can cover quite a large range of production capacity from 20 to 100% and still produce a pretty stable amount of hydrogen production. And that's that idea of flexibility to intermittency is also very important. In the next few slides, I'll hand it back to Mahesh to go over a case study that will go into this in a lot more detail.
Hey, thanks, Ricky. So in this case study, what we are trying to do is ask the question as to if you have a hybrid plant where you are using it for local generation and using most of that electricity for feeding the electrolyzer, how do you configure that plant in a manner that you can get the most optimal levelized cost of hydrogen? So in this case, the size of the PV plant, the size of the EL plant have to be determined based upon the electricity that will be generated from the solar PV plant, as well as whether this is an off-grid system or a grid-connected system. If it's off-grid, then essentially the solar PV the plant is going to provide most of the energy that is being utilized by the electrolyzers. Whereas if it's grid connected, then there is a potential of using that. So we developed a techno-economical model for that to optimize the hybrid plant configuration. Some of the input variables that we took into account are, for example, the electrolyzer economics, particularly the capex, the degradation, O&M cost, durability, that have an impact on how on the electrolyzer aspects of green hydrogen production. In addition, we took the PV plant energy economics, in particularly PV LCOE. This is very already mentioned several times. The levelized cost of energy from PV plant is very well understood. Second, whether you have a grid PPA, which means that would you be able to sell excess electricity to the grid at a certain price, as well as levelized cost of energy of anything that you buy from the grid, for example, that will play a role as well. In some cases, you may decide to choose a battery energy storage system, then the levelized cost of storage of that comes into play, because that adds additional cost of energy, project financing, etc. And that will in turn provide us the ability to figure out what is the electrolyzer size, PV plant size, and BESS size that optimizes the levelized cost of hydrogen. The calculations determine how much hydrogen will be produced, how much PV energy is used for hydrogen, how much grid energy, if that's being used from hydrogen for hydrogen production. Capacity factor is how well the electrolyzers are utilized, and various green hydrogen economics. There are fixed costs, which are principally coming from the electrolyzer part, and the energy cost, and anything else that, and you'll see some results of it. But the bottom line is that when you run a model like that, you can actually figure out an optimal point, because there's a trade-off between the capacity of the electrolyzers versus the capacity of the PV plant, and the cost associated with individual components. Typically, the electrolyzer fixed cost, which is as we add the capacity of the electrolyzers, then it increases, whereas it also results in decreasing energy costs, because now we are basically using the PV plant more effectively, and you will see some examples of that as well. So we developed this a real-time simulator, as well as a simulator that can go over a complete profile of solar. So depending upon the PV that is being generated, we can figure out the rate at which hydrogen will be generated by the electrolyzers, based upon the number of electrolyzers you select, how much of that electricity may go into the grid or get curtailed, whatever is the appropriate thing that needs to happen. So, for example, this may be a simple daily profile of solar. As the power of solar increases, this feeds into a model which will say, okay, given that the amount of power is quite small, it will use, for example, in this case, 2 electrolyzers. And this will be, so it's kind of efficiently using the electrolyzers and producing the hydrogen at a different rate. As the power during the day increases, more electrolyzers are being used, the hydrogen rate goes up for the whole plant, and so forth. At some point, it may reach a saturation point. In this case, we have configured it for 5 electrolyzers. So the power to electrolyzers completely saturates, and then additional power basically goes to the grid. And so this may look like a typical profile on a sunny day, and the utilization of electrolyzers is 49%, and hydrogen is kind of shown here. The rest of the power is either going to the grid or could be curtailed, depending upon whether it's an off-grid situation or not. So we can simulate different EL capacities. So here is an example where, suppose if you were to choose fewer number of electrolyzers, which will reduce your capital cost on that. However, you may end up with more of the energy from solar not being utilized. And you can go in the other direction where you can have more electrolyzers. In that case, certainly you are making a great use of the PV energy that's being available. However, the utilization of the electrolyzers goes down, which will in turn increase your fixed cost. So the bottom line is that increasing in EL capacity for a given profile for solar may result in higher hydrogen production, but the lower EL utilization. So these are the kinds of trade-offs that we have to play with. How about if we understand the impact of grid power? So in this case, suppose we allow grid power to be utilized as well in the times when solar power is not available. The EL utilization can go up. And if we use 100% grid power, of course, we can go all the way to 100% utilization. However, one has to figure out whether that would be treated as a green power, green hydrogen or not, because of grid power. If it's not not produced from renewable sources, etc., that could be an issue as well. But these kinds of trade-offs can be done. Perhaps you then figure out that if that's the case, how about if we add storage? And so the hybrid plant would look something like that, where the solar PV can provide power both to the electrolyzers as well as when there is access to the energy storage system. And then the energy storage system can feed that power back to the electrolyzers when PV power isn't available. So the profile may look something like this. This is where this excess power is going to charge the batteries, which in turn will help essentially use that power for electrolyzers during rest of the time when it is not PV power isn't available. So in this case, the EL utilization can go up, and then you might be asking yourself a question: how do we increase that even further? And one way of doing that would be to say, okay, suppose if instead of having 5 modules, if I just use 3, so all that excess power then now goes into the battery energy storage system. So in that case, I can actually utilize the electrolyzers 100% of the time. However, what happens is that you have to then worry about what is the cost adder for the energy storage. So if you are making the assumption that the energy coming from PV, let's say, is $20 a megawatt hour, but by the time I put it in the storage and get it back from the storage, the cost has gone up to, let's say, 40 or 60 or 80. Now the whole what is the most optimal configuration will change. So in this case, what I'm showing is that if the cost adder is 100%, so instead of 20, it becomes 40, which is still very, I would say, very aggressive with storage. Then you can certainly control the plant in a manner that satisfies these kinds of conditions. However, if the cost adder starts increasing, then an optimal situation may be to use more electrolyzers and use as little not as much battery power as possible. And so you can see in this case where I have a 200% energy cost adder, so instead of 20, now I'm talking about $60 per megawatt hour, then it may be more optimal for the same levelized cost of hydrogen. The utilization can go down, but you will get the same benefit as well as far as the configuration is concerned. Now, what I am describing to you was the situation where you have a nice sunny profile, and that may be something like this. But in practice, the solar profile changes over the whole year. So in some other profile, the hydrogen production is going to be reduced, as kind of illustrated in these diagrams as well. So what we have to do is actually integrate this over the whole typical year, and that's what I'm showing you here. So in this case, the production is actually a function of the available resource over the whole year. And in this case, this is in the northern hemisphere. You can see that in the middle of the summer, there's a lot more solar energy produced and utilized. The gray here is the excess solar that's going into the grid. And we are using 5 electrolyzer modules in this case. And you can see that in some months, like the off season, the electrolyzers are utilized completely fully. So we can also use this model and integrate it over the year to figure out what is the impact of different capacity. If I use, for example, 3 modules instead of 5, which means I'm changing the capacity of the electrolyzer, the utilization will go up, but I'm going to produce less hydrogen. And on the other hand, if I use more electrolyzer modules, I'll be using the electricity much more so for generating hydrogen. However, it would be the utilization of the electrolyzers will go down. And so we can run a simulation for a particular site and its solar profile and its available resources to figure out what would be the optimal. In the case of a hybrid where we can consider wind and solar together, certainly that would help as well. And we can figure that part out. So the bottom line is that in the way to optimize the hybrid plant design, particularly to reduce LCOH, we are on one hand increasing the capacity of the electrolyzer so that we can fully utilize the PV electricity, and that reduces energy cost as it's kind of shown here. Remember, these costs are in terms of LCOH. So you can clearly see by that here the energy cost is much lower than in the case of fewer electrolyzer. However, it increases the fixed capital cost, as you can see in the bottom blue part of the diagram. And so that's the idea. So to summarize, in order to get to a competitive green hydrogen, what we are taking advantage of is utility scale PV solar that provides a very competitive and low cost electricity, combined with PEM electrolyzers, which provide the flexibility to deal with the fact that solar profile changes. Even if we had wind with it, they're both combined together would change. And but PM electrolyzers are much more resilient to such changes and can react very well. And so combined hybrid plant can indeed provide, can be optimized to produce green hydrogen. And we also got the control systems that can manage this on a real-time basis as well, to provide the appropriate results from the plant. With that, that's our summary of this presentation, and we'll be happy to address any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mahesh, and thank you, Steve, and thank you, Ricky. That was a wonderfully pithy and interesting presentation, and it's showing in our absolutely booming Q&A section, which is raring to go. We have a fair bit of time, which is fantastic, so I'm excited to jump in. I will try and direct some of these questions to you individually as best I can, but of course, if you want to jump in, add anything, expand, elaborate, by all means. I thought this looked like a good place to start, and that's for you, Steve, and that is coming from, let's get the question up here. What are the main potential markets for green hydrogen in the US, and what is enabling green hydrogen development there?
Yeah, I think the certainly the early market for green hydrogen is going to be in the mobility sector. We already see some incentives, some market-based incentives, like the low carbon fuel standard in California, where you can earn a marketable credit for low carbon fuels such as green hydrogen. And so that's driving a lot of potential investment in plants that will utilize green hydrogen for both not just kind of gaseous hydrogen fuel, but also as an input to things like biodiesel or methanol and fuels like that could then be sold into that market. And so we certainly see other opportunities. There's a proposal for, say, a production tax credit at the federal level that could also drive a lot of investment in green hydrogen, through that tax policy incentive. So there's a number of things that are going to be driving interest in green hydrogen. I mean, for today, I think looking for those kinds of incentives to help kind of level the playing field a bit is really the thing that I think will help to drive those opportunities.
Yeah, there's potential's certainly there. How about we jump to, it's a question for you, Ricky. Can you provide details on capacities of PV required to get X amount of hydrogen? So a lot of questions that seem to be coming in were people asking for a bit of energy mathematics in terms of generation and product. Of course, that depends on a lot of variables, but maybe you could give a bit of a rough outline.
Well, I can speak to the case study that I worked on that I mentioned in my talk. We were looking at California, which is two regions, one in the south, which is very ideal for having a high solar and wind resource in the same location. In that location, there are also older wind turbines that can be retrofitted and have room for adding solar. And so, as I mentioned, the combined capacity of solar and wind in that Southern California was about 75%, which is quite high. It still leaves the 25% remaining for the grid, which is actually fairly clean in California. In Northern California, we were looking at a net metering case where the utility would actually give credit for any generation that's sent to the grid, and you can get a one-to-one credit, and so you can actually get 100% renewable electricity powering the electrolyzers, and that's where you get the greenest hydrogen production. But from a more general standpoint, in the U.S., for example, capacity factors range from 25 to 35% for utility scale solar, and so you have to figure out what you're going to do for the rest of the 75 or 65%. Are you going to use battery storage or combine with wind or go with the grid?
That leads neatly on to a rather consistent question we were getting, and I can shift this one to you, Mahesh, which is basically, I'll try and kind of collaborate and paraphrase. Does it make sense to add energy storage for load leveling? Obviously, we have in the case study the 25% of needs to be covered, or is currently being covered by the grid in that case. What's the best optimization setup, in your opinion?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So first of all, suppose we have an off-grid system, and in that case where there's no grid, etc., and you are relying upon your own resources within that, so then the cost of battery energy storage matters. So the levelized cost, what we call levelized cost of storage. So if I'm producing PV electricity at $20 per megawatt hour, and by the time it goes to the storage, it adds to become $60 per megawatt hour because of the storage cost and so forth, then the energy cost for green hydrogen goes up almost linearly. Certainly, so that's one has to take that into account. So it can be, one can figure out this optimization very easily. The important point that I think that I want to emphasize is that to make it competitive, green hydrogen does not necessarily mean that you have to run the electrolyzers 100% of the time. In fact, that's exactly what I was showing you, was that if you run the model and if the electricity cost, and especially with PEM electrolyzers, which are flexible, it may even pencil in even when they are not completely 100% utilized. So in other words, they are not powered 100% of the time. Now, there is some amount of standby power, etc., is needed for rest of the system, but all that can be taken into account as well. Okay. Now, if it's on-grid system, and like Ricky was saying, if the rest of the grid accepts that if I generate X amount of renewable power, renewable energy, let's say, and the net that I'm using for generation of electrolyzers is the same, then perhaps that's fine. In that case, I'm still generating as many green electrons as possible, not strictly physics-wise, but at least green electricity, and I'm using that in even though it's being exchanged with the grid to run the plant 100% of the time, let's say. Yeah.
Thank you. I think we'll shift a question back to you, Steve. And that is quite a general question, but how do you see the price evolution of electrolyzers in the next 5 years, and what would be the drivers in that hopefully declination?
Yeah, I think that certainly manufacturing volume is going to help in terms of the capital cost of electrolyzers. I think one of the things that we are doing is really kind of moving into more kind of commercial manufacturing techniques and processes. On the PEM side, we're doing work on say roll-to-roll manufacturing of membrane electrode assemblies for our PEM electrolyzers, which really will help to drive a lot of cost out of our cell stacks, which is the most expensive component in the system. And I mentioned in my remarks earlier that we have a new state-of-the-art factory in Norway for production of our electrodes for our alkaline electrolyzers, and I was over there last month for a grand opening of that factory. And between the increased capacity, which is about 500 megawatts per year per production line, along with these new kind of state-of-the-art manufacturing processes, we're talking about reducing the capital cost of our alkaline cell stacks by a factor of about a half over the baseline cost at our older factory. So those kinds of things are really making a big potential step change in the capex of electrolyzers for both technologies.
Very interesting. And this one's coming, actually, this one's relevant to what we were slightly talking about off air, which is great. As anyone who was at Intersolar in Munich last week would probably know, is that many of the world's leading module manufacturers, while in sturdy health, may be finding modules hard to come by. If green hydrogen projects, enormous amounts of modules necessary. Ricky, will the modules be available in the next 5 years?
I think there is a challenge right now in terms of supply. I mean, I think this is not restricted to the solar industry. It's a global imbalance between supply and demand that's causing inflation, et cetera. So we do have a situation like within First Solar of having quite healthy demand for our products in the next few years. At the same time, a project like we're describing, a hybrid electrolyzer renewable plant, is a long-term development project. It's something where you have to go through permitting, development, construction, et cetera. So your planning horizon is going to be multiple years, and so I think that gives some help in terms of not needing the technology right away, but being able to plan for it. And I think a lot of the customers who are interested in green hydrogen are medium to long term thinkers. They're looking at it as a solution for the really hard to electrify use cases, and are thinking ahead for 5 to 10 years ahead.
Mm-hmm. Get those orders in early. This one is another kind of amalgam of a bunch of questions I saw, which is just in relation to storage, which of course we touched on briefly, but a lot of questioners are wondering about other forms of storage other than BESS in terms of linking with pumped hydro or liquid air, and perhaps even just hydrogen in tanks and pressurized, and what kind of efficiency can be garnered from other systems tying in with the hybrid.
Yeah, so if I may, I mean, first of all, we should differentiate between electric storage, which is what storage like pumped hydro and others will generate, versus hydrogen as a fuel itself, which may go into other applications. If it's used again with a fuel cell to generate electricity, that's surely a possibility, but it's a different mindset about that. Let's put it that way. So when you ask me about storage, I'm assuming that storage in the hybrid plant context is what is being referred to, as opposed to storage in the grid itself. And within that context, all of those options are available. However, lithium-ion battery energy storage seems to be the most developed and has the potential to further reduce the cost. I mean, the Department of Energy at US DOE has a target of reducing that to $100 per kilowatt hour capacity cost by the end of the decade, if not earlier. I think that reduces the additional cost on energy that we would be using. So in that case, I can imagine large off-grid plants with sufficient storage in them so they can utilize the electrolyzers 24 hours a day without having a large impact on the energy cost. Yeah.
And is an interesting one, perhaps for you, Steve, but also an open question. What is your opinion about decentralized and small-scale green hydrogen installations? Are they viable in the long term or just a transition step?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's going to be situations where doing large centralized plants is going to be your lowest cost option, but decentralized, distributed hydrogen production is going to make sense in certain cases as well. I mean, the advantage of kind of distributed hydrogen production is that you can eliminate or minimize transportation costs, and that is a pretty significant factor in the overall cost of getting hydrogen to market is the cost of transporting it. And so so there's a lot of kind of factors that affect how you want to optimize the sizing of your plant, and certainly one of those is going to be if you have to transport the hydrogen long distance, in which case you're not going to do it as a gas, you're going to do it as a liquid. And so when we look at a lot of the larger export projects, invariably you're looking at transporting the hydrogen in some kind of liquid molecule. There's not kind of a one size fits all for what's the best way to size a plant.
Sure. We might have time for two more questions if I can squeeze in. This one again for you, Stephen, and it's just what values are examples of the lowest levelized cost of hydrogen you've seen in electrolyzer plants that NEL has delivered globally?
Yeah, again, it really the cost of green hydrogen from electrolysis is largely determined by the cost of the electricity feedstock. So, we've seen some plants at industrial sites where the customer may have a very good industrial rate, or they're taking advantage of some kind of time dependent rate, and they're able to produce very cost effective hydrogen. So really it's that's primarily the thing that's driving the cost of the hydrogen, and really in the markets that we're serving today, it's all about the economics of getting hydrogen delivered to your point of use, and if we can do it cost effectively through electrolysis rather than through delivered gas, then we're going to compete favorably.
Wonderful. And I think we might have just tipped over our last minute there. So thank you very much to our speakers, and thank you to everyone at home or in the office for your questions and participation. As always, we get many more questions than we can get to in the allocated hour, but thank you all for contributing. As always, the sign of interest in this topic is very promising for a future for green hydrogen. Make sure to pick up your copy of PV Magazine International's May edition. Pictured there, you can read some of our current and trending news and features from the June edition. Sorry, May edition, I apologize. We also have some great upcoming webinars in multiple languages. See there, we have French and a one-stop shop for PV installers. That's going to be a very interesting and highly attended event. You'll be receiving a survey at the end of this webinar. And as always, we're looking to improve. So if you could give us any kind of feedback that comes to mind, we'd very much appreciate it. There is a recording of this webinar, just to remind you, coming to your email or the email of the registrant. That also includes a link to the slides. Thank you to everyone for joining us wherever you are in the world, and thank you for your interest. All the best. Goodbye.